Alpina made some pretty big claims about what they did to fit the M60 engine into an E36. According to them, 42 modifications were made to the body to accommodate this engine. My opinion is that number is a little bit overblown because I think they're adding in things like brackets that they're welding in to hold various accessories. So I'm going to try to go through and highlight what I've identified and what I can see are differences to the E36 body to accommodate the M60 engine. So right off the bat, you can see that there's a whole bunch of accessories here on the driver's side or left side of the engine bay. They obviously needed to install a bracket to mount the hydraulic reservoir. They had to also weld on a bracket for the cruise control actuator, and then another bracket for the ABS pump. What's a little bit harder to see down there is that they also included a bracket to mount the hydraulic booster. This is a nitrogen accumulator similar to an E31 or E32, so they had to mount that down there as well, so that's an additional bracket. Moving towards the brake booster, I believe that bracket is also in addition to be able to mount some type of hydraulic valve system because there is no brake booster, as you can see, and they needed to route a bunch of lines to that hydraulic accumulator that I mentioned that is kind of down here. You can see the nut or the bolt that holds it on to the bracket. So that's kind of what I can see on the left side of the car. According to the Alpina parts catalog, there's also some type of bracket in here that holds a cooling coil. I think that's for the hydraulic system or power steering. I'll have to double check. But there is an additional cooler in there. You can kind of see it behind the grills. Over on the right side of the car, I don't think there's a whole lot of modifications. You can obviously see there's a custom Alpina airbox and intake. What they did install here, they welded two brackets for the airbox to mount to. So those are the only differences that I noticed on the right side of the car. They did obviously have to have custom AC lines produced in order for the AC compressor for the M60 to fit. But that's everything I can kind of visually see and identify from the parts catalog on differences inside of the engine bay. Now obviously on the hood there is no hood insulation because with the E36 hood insulation it couldn't fit. So they ditched that in the Alpina B8. Oh, also before I forget, you notice this is a Euro M3 cover. And they did relocate the washer bottle because on a regular E36, the washer bottle is where the airbox is. So you can see they actually installed a washer bottle behind the front bumper. So that cap and the hose that goes down into the reservoir is actually a BMW part. However, the reservoir itself is an Alpina specific part. All right, into the belly of the beast. So I'm going to try to highlight all the things that were done down here that are different from a regular E36. So this is a rack and pinion steering rack. It has a E36 part number, but I couldn't track down which rack it shares with in the other E36 line. So maybe this is something that BMW built to Alpina spec for them. So you can see there are much bigger front brakes. My car is a little rusty since it was from Germany, but nothing structural. So bigger brakes in the front. Standard E36 lower control arms, but I believe the outer ball joint is reinforced. So my car does have a custom sway bar and sway bar bushings, as you can see. Forgive the noise, there's some construction going on outside. You can see that it does use the offset E36 M3 3.0 lower control arm bushings. Based on what I can see, it looks like an X-brace should fit on this car, so I'm going to give that a try when the time comes. So interesting thing to note, you can see the steering column snakes through the exhaust headers. This engine mount kind of bracket on the subframe, I believe that's also Alpina specific because there seems to be a part number for it on the catalog. The bracket that the mount and the block connects to, you can see is also obviously custom, both on the left and the right side. Custom oil sump for it to clear the subframe. I think you can see the nitrogen accumulator I mentioned earlier. Yep, there it is. So you can see that hanging out up there. Okay, let's see what else. You can obviously see the exhaust manifold and exhaust system, that's all custom. O2 sensor bracket. The transmission cross member is also Alpina specific. And that water stripping that's just from the air conditioner, since I had that running earlier. All of these heat shields are standard E36, so they are falling apart. I'll eventually get them replaced. BMW still sells them new. So one modification I did notice that the previous owner had done, there's supposed to be an exhaust connection here, so that way the mid pipes and the muffler are detachable from one another. But the pipe pipe is actually very narrow, so it looks like what they did was cut that section out and weld in much thicker or larger diameter pipes. So quick note about the steering column. I mentioned earlier that it snakes through the headers, but for what Alpina needed to also do was to modify where the steering column came out in the firewall. They had to relocate that, I believe, a little bit lower because the engine would have gotten in the way. So that is a modification they actually did to the body itself. Continuing back, you can see the massive diff cover with fins for cooling. Alpina is obsessed with diff oil temperature, so they did that on the B8. So the subframe itself is from an M3. So the trailing arms are M3. The half shafts are M3, control arms, etc., all from a M3 3.0. All this stuff is just a little surface rust. So interestingly, this muffler is the same part number as the one from a B3 3.2. So where the subframe mounts to the body in white, so basically this bolt, and then there's two on this side as well, there are reinforcing plates welded onto the body, just like an M3. So it's a little hard to see, but you can see there's a little bit of extra material and an edge there for the plate that is welded in. Again, eventually, once this subframe comes out for any bushing replacements, I'm going to have the whole thing sandblasted and powder coated, just so that way the surface rust is treated. Here's another shot of that diff cover. It's pretty big. One thing I noticed in the BMW parts catalog is that the E36 M3 in Europe has this additional, I don't know what it is, but a vibration dampener that is bolted onto the subframe. If you look at a US E36 M3 subframe, it has a bolt hole for it, but the part is not on the parts catalog. But it is a Euro specific thing. Oh, and obviously the drive shaft is custom for the transmission. Forgot to mention that. So the transmission itself is a 6-speed unit. It has the same Getrag part number or model number as a transmission on a E34 540i, E39 540i, and E39 M5. On the rear of the car, here's another shot of the diff cover. You can see the connection for the temperature sensor. Look at the muffler. And this rear diffuser on the bumper is also an Alpina specific part. Back to the front of the car, you can see there's an additional oil cooler here. So this is engine oil cooler. So that coil that is behind the front kidney grills is actually for the steering and hydraulic system. You can see the connections for the oil cooler. So I'll have to double check, but I believe when the B8 originally came out, or at least from the factory, that this Alpina lip is actually not cut out where their air can pass through. Because on my B3, it does not pass through, it's just solid. But I guess when the previous owner had the entire front end redone, maybe they cut out this splitter just for extra airflow or whatever, for whatever reason. It is bonded to the bumper. The bumper needs to be trimmed a little bit for it to clear this part that sticks backwards towards the center of the car. So you can see a little bit of the residue from the glue or epoxy used to bond this lip to the front bumper. Here's a little Easter egg. You can see the M logo on the trailing arm. So all these fuel lines on my car are relatively clean because I had the underside of this car dry ice blasted. One of the previous owners put a ton of underbody coating on the car just to protect it from rust. So I had my dry ice cleaner guy remove some of the material because it was just caked on really thick. So what's left over hopefully should be more than plenty to protect the car in Southern California. And to close out this video, some engine noises.